I was hidden by Chinese locals from the police in an area behind a wall that was put up to keep the media and the public out in China. And today I'm finally going to share that story, and I'm going to show you the photos right now. Hi, I'm Adam and I'm a documentary photographer, and if you're interested in seeing some of the projects that I've worked on as a documentary photographer in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Australia, definitely be sure to subscribe. I'm going to be sharing some of those stories, some behind the scenes, and also just some general stuff about documentary photography, which there's not actually a lot of here on YouTube. But anyway, let's get to the story that you're here for today. It actually happened quite a few years ago, but this is the time when I'm finally getting around to sharing it on video, telling the story and showing the images. This is not something I take lightly, sharing this story, but these stories need to be told, and the people that I spoke with in China that I'm going to share their stories, they wanted me to get it out there. They wanted people telling the other side of the story. So that's what this video is about, and some of the other videos that are coming up, so be sure to subscribe. So on this day, I was living in the city of Guangzhou. It's a large city in the south of China, not far from Hong Kong, a couple of hours from Hong Kong, and a very developed city. I was in Guangzhou doing various things, and I was particularly interested in doing street photography at the time, and I was drawn to these urban villages, which were these areas of really densely populated pockets of Guangzhou with a lot of the migrant workers were living in these areas because they offered really cheap, affordable accommodation. But what really drew me to these areas was just visually, they were really interesting. There were a lot of really interesting textures, and the light was amazing because they were the really densely packed buildings with narrow alleys in between them. And so when the light came down, it was like being at the bottom of a ravine with a shaft of light coming down. So it was really dramatic light. There were deep shadows and this intense light, and I just loved it. I loved it. The people were great. The migrant workers were the nicest people I've known. I felt like I'd found my people because we just connected. So I really liked the people that were there. I liked the environment. It's not the nicest environment. It can be dirty and smelly and not overly hygienic. The drainage isn't the best. And these are all arguments that support transforming these areas into something clean and nice and, you know, more hygienic. And that's what the government was doing. They were basically tearing down these old buildings and putting up new ones. Now, I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the backstory and some of that situation in other videos. But for now, I'm going to just be talking about the day when I saw things that I feel so privileged to see, because even the media, the local Chinese media, didn't get to see these things. So I was interested in these urban villages, and I heard that something was going to be happening. I got a tip from, you know, a friend of a friend that there was going to be some drama in one of the urban villages. It was Yangji village. And at that stage, most of the village had already been demolished, but there were a few landowners, a few landlords that were really digging in their feet because they felt that they weren't getting recompensed fairly for their properties. It was meant to be either that they got paid per square meter of their property, or that they were given a place in the new development once it was built that had the same amount of square meters. And they said that either the amount that they were getting recompensed was not fair based on the current market value, or that they were getting ripped off in terms of how many square meters in the new development they were getting. But that's even the square meters there's a story in that as well for another video. But there were these landlords that are really saying, no, we're not going to sign a contract, we're not going to sign our properties over. And the Chinese call them 钉子户. And 钉子户means, like, literally would be nail resident. And these are the landowners that are really difficult to get out, like a nail in a piece of wood, a rusty nail that's in there really deeply, and you have to apply a lot of force, a lot of pressure to pull it out. And so these landowners were fighting for their properties, to either keep the properties and not destroy the whole area and redevelop, or to be more fairly recompensed. And they were talking about all kinds of corruption in the local government and the courts and all kinds of things, again, for another video. So they said something was going to be going down, that they were going to be trying to forcefully evict one of these Dingzi, one of the nail residents. And so I went around early that morning. I had a bicycle, I rode my bicycle along, and they had a wall up around the entire community. And there were a number of gates all around. It's a very large area. And on that day, they had police at each of the gates, which is something I'd never seen. I'd been by that area many times, never saw police there. There was media outside the wall, but the police weren't letting anybody in. The only people who were allowed in were the residents who actually lived there. So I'm like, oh well, so much for that. That's it was a nice idea, but obviously I'm not getting in there. But anyway, I kept riding, and then I discovered one of the gates didn't have anyone there. There was no officer there, and it was around a corner, so it was actually out of sight of the other officers. And I thought, oh well, I might just wander in and take some photos, and if they kick me out, they kick me out. So I went in the gate. I think that the officer that was responsible for that one had probably been off grabbing some breakfast or something like that. But anyway, I got in there and I just wandered around, started taking some photos. There was an interesting temple that hadn't been torn down yet. And I thought, okay, I'll photograph as much as I can before they come and kick me out. And then along came somebody in through the gate, walked straight up to me, and I'm like, okay, here we go. They're gonna send me out and that'll be it. I'll call it a day. But it turned out it was one of the local residents, and we just got to talking, and he asked me what I was doing, and I'm just documenting the situation, the environment, what's going on here. And he said, well, you know what, we're probably going to have to hide you because there was a couple of police inside the wall, but they were actually the Yangji police. They were from that area, and they were actually supportive of the residents. So it's like, they're okay, they're not going to give you trouble, but when the other police come, then there may be trouble. So why don't you come in? We'll take you into one of our homes, and it's quite tall. You can go up to the top floor and you can see everything that happens, and you'll be safe in there. And once everything's over and everybody's left, then you can go out again. So I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to get to see what goes on behind the wall when some of these things that that normally get swept under the rug, that usually get or reported in a slightly different way from how it actually played out, I'm going to see how it plays out. So I was really excited. I thought, this is going to be so cool. So I was pretty new to doing any kind of photojournalism or documentary photography, but this is actually the day that kind of got me hooked, because I just loved the idea of seeing the inside story and telling those stories visually, which is a way I feel very comfortable in doing it. So first I went and talked with some of the residents. We could communicate. My Chinese was good enough to communicate with them. Even though most of them were Cantonese, they could still speak Mandarin. And so they just told me that there was a couple, an elderly couple. One of them was the woman that was speaking with me, was from that couple. And they had been fighting for what they said was fair compensation for their property. Now, looking at the property, I can see where the murkiness starts to come in, because if they had added on extra floors without actually applying for permits, without doing things through the proper legal ways, then those floors are actually not recognized. And so the government, of course, would not recompense them for the square meters of those particular floors. And looking at the building, I kind of had a feeling that may have been what happened, because I had heard stories of people who, as soon as they heard that development was coming, they rushed in and added extra floors so they could get more recompense. Like I said, it's not a straightforward story. It's complicated, and there's definitely probably some dodgy things on both sides in this whole situation. But anyway, I spoke with them for a bit, and they said, oh, you know, things are probably going to start happening soon. They're going to try and take the couple, they're going to forcefully evict them from their property. And so they took me into their building, and I went up into the floor that was second from the top and looked out the window. Now, a bunch of the village landowners were in there filming everything that went on, just to keep everyone accountable. They were quite obvious in their being there and filming. So I think that was kind of a bit of a safeguard against anything getting too ugly. So anyway, things were okay, and they fenced off the area around the couple's building. And then I thought things were getting interesting when the riot squad came in. These were dressed all in black. They were dressed differently from the regular police officers. And so I'm like, oh, okay, something's definitely going to happen. The problem was that my long lens that could have captured so many details of what happened had been stolen that week, and that's another story for another video as well. So I didn't have a zoom lens or a telephoto lens that I could actually capture the details of what was going on. So I was really mad at myself for, you know, at least not borrowing somebody else's lens, but I had no idea what was going to go on that day when I went in. This all just unfolded in front of me. So they sent a couple of negotiators to the old couple that were in their building to try and talk them out and get them to leave. And it got a bit dramatic, and the man actually grabbed a gas bottle that they use for cooking with and threatened to blow himself up. And so the negotiators were working with him for quite a while, and eventually it was a few hours, and during this time some of the local residents were getting carted off by police. Now, I can't tell you exactly what happened because I only saw it from a distance, but I did make sure that I took photos of the police carting them off, because it wasn't actually reported in the news that that actually happened. They were detained until the whole thing was over and then released without charge. But the family members of those two men that were actually carried off were really, really nervous, because they had no idea what was going to happen to them, because they weren't given any formal charges or any justification for being carted off. And so they were quite nervous until they were released actually later in the afternoon that day, after everything had finished and the media had all left. So eventually, I don't really know what ended up happening. I don't know whether there was coercion or whether they came to an amicable agreement, but eventually the couple did agree to leave their property. And so after some time of them being inside their building with these two negotiators, a removalist truck came into the village, pulled up, and they started carrying out all their furniture and putting it into a truck. And that's when they let the media in, so that they could take photos of this couple happily loading up the truck and leaving. And it was a victory for everybody, because they got a great, they came to a great agreement that everybody was happy with. And here they are, packing up their home to move to a better life. Like I said, I'm not going to make things up. I'm not going to try and paint anybody as bad guys or good guys or anything like that. And all I really want to show is some of the things that basically the media weren't allowed to show. They weren't allowed to show the people getting carried off by the police. They weren't allowed to show, you know, any of they didn't show the riot squad. They didn't, because they left before they brought the journalists in. I'm not saying it's a massive cover-up and anything like that, but I definitely saw the way things actually work there, and how things go with the media, and how the scene is kind of sanitized a little bit before they allow the media in. So I felt really, really privileged that the locals had kept me in there and allowed me to witness something that, you know, even the other people who live in Guangzhou would never actually get to see. So that was that day, and that's what really got me hooked on photojournalism and documentary photography. And from that point, I actually started finding out about the story and looking into what was the situation with these urban villages, and finding out, you know, some more of the details. And there were some pretty dramatic things that I heard and that I saw, particularly with another urban village called Xiancun. Xian village, where a lot more of the locals stood together and tried to oppose the government. And I have photos of their protests, I have photos of the propaganda that the government put up and things that they tried to convince the locals to sign their properties over. Even protest cartoons that you never see coming out of China. I'm going to show you them in another video for sure, and they're pretty cool. So all of this stuff, yeah, but on that day was kind of, I suppose, the day that opened it up, that kind of unlocked this vision of, hey, there's a really big and interesting story going on in this city. And it really made me want to find out more. And so I'm going to be sharing what I found out in future videos. So let me know what you'd be interested in knowing, what you'd be interested in seeing. Maybe you have some insight that I don't into the whole situation, and maybe you've been there much more recently than me. I left China in 2013, so it's already 7 years since I was there. So I'm sure things have changed a lot in Guangzhou as well. So if you have anything that's going to add to the conversation, definitely leave it below, and I'd love to hear from you. I really would love to know, you know, how things have progressed in Yangji village. Well, actually, I know Yangji village is no longer there. Eventually, they did clear out everybody, and now, looking on Google Maps, you can see that there's a completed, very large residential complex there. But Xiancun, I think, is a different story. I know that now, looking at Google Maps, they're finally getting pretty close to completely leveling the thing, but that's a really, really interesting place with a really, really interesting story, including a very corrupt official who the people, through banding together, actually managed to bring justice to. So that is for another video, but thanks for watching all the way through this one. And me rambling and showing a few photos, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learnt something or got something out of it, or it made you think, or it, yeah, I don't know, just thanks for watching, really. And I hope you subscribe for more, and please, for the people whose stories I'm going to be sharing, please share the stories, because that's why they let me in. That's why they took me in and protected me from the police, because they wanted me to share their story. So if you think that there's an interesting story there, or if you just think there are interesting images, then please share, and I'll see you in the next video.